Hello. So today we are going to discuss about Azure policy and initiatives, which is part of the Azure cloud governance. This is an important concept to know for AZ 104 exam. So what is Azure policy? So where in cloud, we require a governance tool for defining and enforcing rules on Azure resources. Because we will be having so many Azure resources, we cannot individually go and govern or have guardrails for Azure resource, right? So we need to have a governance tool which will automatically do policy governance and guardrails for us. So Azure policy will help with that. It will help with standardization of deployments, uh, aligns with the compliance and automates remediation. So if we want to have more standard deployments, more someone should not deploy something which should not be deployed. It should be very standard. It should align with compliance of our organization, and it can also help. So Azure policy can also help with automate remediation. So if someone actually goes and deploys something non-standard, then there should be an automatic remediation to remove that deployment and make it standard, make it a standard deployment. Okay. So it also allows Azure policy assignment across scopes. So Azure policy is not only for a specific resource, but we can apply it for a resource group, for a complete subscription, or a complete management group. Okay, so Azure policy can be applied at different levels. So that it is very important to understand. Okay, okay. So the key benefits of Azure policy are centralized compliance management across subscriptions. So if we have multiple subscriptions, then we can still apply the same Azure policy across multiple subscriptions. So that is better compliance management for us. Automated enforcement to avoid human error. Okay. It is an efficient remediation to correct policy violations automatically. Okay, so anyone accidentally violates policy, then it can help with automatic remediation of that. Flexible scope and inheritance for scalable governance. So as I mentioned earlier, it can be applied at different scopes and across different subscriptions so that we can make this governance scalable in Azure. So which is a good feature. So the common use case for Azure policies we usually find is that if we want to restrict the deployment to allowed resource types, such that our teams deploy only specific resource types, then that can be done through Azure policy. If we want to limit the virtual machine SKUs to control the costs, so we should not be allowing a higher cost SKUs to be deployed. So if you want to limit virtual machine SKUs control cost, then also Azure policy will be very useful. Okay. And we want to enforce allowed locations for data residency compliance. So for example, for GDPR, only someone from Europe should be able to see the data, just for example. And for certain locations, there are different data residency policies and compliance. So that can be enforced for the locations that we want. Okay. So again, Azure policy is a very good tool for that. Uh, Azure policy require tags and specific values for classification. So if we want to tag particular resources and we want to apply policy only for those resources, then Azure policy can help us with that. And we can also ensure that Azure backup is enabled for all virtual machines. So that is one more use case, like we may forget to take backups, right? So if we ensure that Azure backup is enabled for all virtual machines through Azure policy, then it will help us make sure that we take the backups always for all virtual machines. I mean, okay. Moving to the next part here. How to use Azure Policy. So define and create a policy or initiative with specific conditions. So initiative is also a kind of object in Azure policy module where you can group multiple policies together. So that is what it mainly does. Okay. So we can define and create Azure policy or Azure initiative with specific conditions. Then we can choose the scope. We need to choose the scope for the Azure policy. It should be management group. It can be at the management group level, which can be a broader level. Okay. Then there can be it can be at a subscription level. It can be resource group level or at an individual resource level. So right from narrowest one, like an individual resource, to the management group, which will be a broader one, we can choose the scope where we want to apply the Azure policy. And we want to assign and configure the policy. So select the effects and set parameters. So we can configure policy with different effects and parameters as we want. Okay. And we want to evaluate compliance via Azure dashboard and reports. So we can always go to Azure dashboard and check for compliance and reports. So Azure policy provides data to that. So this is just an example, like for example, if you want to create core compliance controls, that can be the name of the policy itself. Okay. So we can have a policy initiative, which is a group of policies. So it will include policies for tagging, it will include policies for locations, it will include policies for proper backups, it will include policies for VM SKUs. Okay. And we will set parameters like tag names. We will set parameter for allowed regions, and we will also approve the SKUs. So we will be able to set the parameters when we define the initiative, policy initiative. We will be able to define the tag names. We will be able to define the allowed regions, and we will be able to define the approved SKUs. Assign at subscription level for broad production control. So we can assign the Azure policy at the subscription level and not worry about individual resource level. Okay. And we can monitor compliance through dashboard and take remedial action. So yeah, Azure policy details can be seen at the dashboard level. This is good. So very quickly, what are the key terms for Azure policy module? Policy definition. It is a rule that can be defined that governs Azure resource configurations. Yeah. Then it also takes care of initiative definition. So group of related policies for broader compliance. So all the related policies can be grouped together as an initiative definition. Scope, level where the policy is applied. So it can be it can be at different levels. So it can be used to define the scope where the policy is applied. Assignment, applying a policy or initiative. So we can assign the policy or initiative at different levels for each resource. Okay, so that is the assignment part of Azure policy. Yeah. And parameters. So we can always pass the parameters to the policy, to Azure policy, which will take care of what we want to, how we want the Azure policy to behave, to make sure it behaves as we want. Compliance scan. So evaluation of resource compliance. So how the resource will be compliant. Okay, so it keeps on. This is like compliance scan is like it runs almost continuously to evaluate that the resources are in compliance as per our Azure policy. So it is not a scheduled kind of thing, but it is almost like a continuous scan that runs. And the final thoughts on this Azure policy is used to provide structure, safety, and governance at scale. Okay. It enables secure it enables secure, consistent, and audit-ready deployments. So we want to make it a secure and consistent deployment. Then we can use Azure Policy. You can start with tagging or region restriction policies and expand gradually. So we can uh, tag as we want using Azure Policy and then expand it gradually. Okay. So whenever new resources are added, we can keep on tagging it as per our requirements. Okay. And Azure Policy is a cornerstone of cloud governance strategy. So it is a very central and important module of Azure, so that we can have a proper cloud governance strategy for organization. Okay. So these were the most important points we should know about Azure Policy.